Good morning. We welcome everyone to the April 17th meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority, and would invite you to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item up is, as usual, is our Safety First Minute. We have Sheldon Shaw with us today as well.
Good morning, Chair, Trustees. Again, appreciate the opportunity to give this Safety Minute. What I chose today was a grade crossing safety lesson learned or opportunity. And so when you're at a grade crossing and you stop for a train that's coming through, when are you allowed to proceed through the grade crossing? What is it that tells you you're allowed to proceed? And unfortunately, what we see, as soon as the gate is high enough to drive a car through, people start driving through the grade crossing. Of course, that's not what the law says. The law says we have to wait till the lights and the bells stop flashing. And you'll see these magnets on a lot of UTA vehicles trying to get that point across. And the reason for that is there may be a second train, and the gates could turn around and come straight back down, and so you don't want to be in crossing if that's the case. And so all of us need to help set the example and wait until lights and bells go out when we're at a gate or a crossing. Thanks.
Thanks. Sheldon, one question for you.
Yes.
Tomorrow is the Great Shakeout, Utah Shakeout. Do we, as an agency, participate in any way?
We do. So we have emergency drills at all our facilities every year. And so if the facility elects to do the Great Shakeout, then that's happened at some of our business units. They may do a fire drill. They may do a drill with respect to if we had an earthquake. And so that is how we participate.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you. We'll next turn to any public comment. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have any public comment for the meeting today. We did, have one comment received online to the board. It's been distributed to the board, and it'll be part of the public record. And I know staff is addressing the comment that was made.
Okay, thank you. Next, turn to item number 5, which is approval of our minutes from April the 10th. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve the board minutes for the April 10th, 2019 board meeting.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to approve our minutes from April the 10th. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. We'll next go to our agency report with Steve Meyer. Steve?
Good morning, Chair. Board members, few items to discuss with you today. I guess I should have had the control. Now I'm going to get rid of it again. Invite the light rail overhaul team to come up to the table. I want to give you a little bit more detailed overview of where we're at with our light rail overhaul program. We're really excited about this and the effort that our team has put into it. Before you were on board as our board, we went out for a procurement to do an overhaul program, and it was a significant proposal that came back was significant. I think around $59 million, and the president CEO at the time, Michael Allegra, said, "Steve, you can do better than that, and go back and take another look at it and how you approach this." So we started talking to the team about taking this in-house and the opportunities that and the benefits we would see from a more educated workforce about our vehicles, less downtime, less time that our vehicles would be away and out of service, and our ability to incrementally make these improvements and get the vehicles back online. So Eddie and his team are here to walk you through a quick presentation on that. Softball.
Hey, well, good morning. This presentation is designed to provide some information on the light rail fleet as well as our overhaul program. I have Jeff Lamar with me and Kyle Stockley with me today. Jeff's the light rail general manager, and Kyle Stockley is the vehicle overhaul and bus support manager. Kyle will take the lead on this presentation, and Jeff and I will be here to offer any support and answer any questions you may have. And so with that, I'll just turn it over to Kyle.
Thanks, Eddie.
So this is the current breakdown of our light rail fleet. So the original 40 were purchased between 1999 and 2003, and then in 2011 we purchased an additional 77. So the life expectancy of a light rail vehicle is about 30 years, and a midlife overhaul is required to hit that benchmark. So this slide is the current mileage of our fleet. So you can see the original 40 have between 750,000 to 1.2 million miles. The newer 77 have between 250 and 450,000 miles, and our streetcars have between 150 and 200,000 miles. So a little history of the program, like Steve said, we were going to go outside in 2015. We brought it in-house, and we changed it from a project to a program. So a project has a defined starting and end point, where a program actually addresses the major maintenance activities through the life of the vehicle. And so the one advantage is we can modify the scope based on the actual activities and performance of the vehicle. And so currently we're scoping out about 2 years ahead of time. And what that does is it reduces the production delay, because parts often have a 52-week lead time. And by bringing the program in-house, we hold ourselves accountable to provide cost savings and reduce the number of vehicles out of service. So to date, we have about 10 specialized shops. This investment to the agency has reduced cost and lead time of the required components. So the body shop we're going to talk about in a second. The brake shop, we actually perform a complete tear down and overhaul of the brake components. And as you can see, there's really a lot of specialized equipment that goes into that. And we do have a proper fabrication and machine shop where we make parts. We actually reverse engineer, design, and produce parts that go onto the light rail vehicle for the overhaul program. So currently we have about 109 sub-projects in the program. These are some of the items that we've completed so far. This is what we're working on currently, and this is the upcoming items. Now, the one thing you'll notice is there's a lot of S70 sub-projects in there. That's the quarter life of the newer of the 77 vehicles we purchased. It's time for the quarter life overhaul. I'm sure you saw in the paper recently that we just wrapped and performed the body work on 2 of the SD100s. We're on track to complete about 3 more in 2019, and our goal is to complete 4 per year throughout the program. So at that rate, it's going to take about 10 years to finish the body program. And if funding becomes available, we'd like to hire additional staff to accelerate if that's possible. So the overhaul program is continuous. To keep the program running smooth, we need to identify a year-over-year budget. The program takes into consideration manufacturer recommendations and industry best practices. We're a member of a light rail user group with agencies across the country. We share engineering specifications, procurement documents, and just best practices. And so that saves all of us time and money. By scoping 2 years ahead of time, it allows us to reduce engineering, contract, and parts procurement hurdles. It also gives us time to deal with obsolescence issues. So in our 5-year capital plan, this is our target budget of what we can accomplish overhauling the entire fleet. And what this does is it enables us to put contracts in place so we don't delay production. And this final slide, this is the result of a vehicle that's been through our body program. And so you can see on there, it looks really nice. On the bottom right slide, we have passenger seats, side windows, interior lights, and other action items. So that's all I have for today.
I do have a couple of questions, and Steve or maybe even Matt might know this question. Some legislators have said we sort of bonded for maintenance, and I'm like, and I'm just wondering, if we in the past was there a bond issued, and did that go toward this program? Did it go towards something else? Or is this just coming through ongoing revenue sources?
So as we've looked at bonding with Bob Biles and that, you can't bond for normal ongoing maintenance. You can't do lube oil filter. You can't bond for that. There needs to be an asset tied to it. Sure. Now you can bond for extending the life of an asset. Yeah. So midlifes would be applicable because it is extending the life of an asset. Specifically, have we identified that? I don't think so. To this point, I don't think we have. We've always used it. We may have offset, local funds in other area for a purchase of a bus, capitalize that, use bond, or now we're leasing, so we're financing that, and then use those dollars to put towards the overhaul, things like that, but not specifically, no.
The other questions I had is, when we were in Washington a few weeks ago, or a few months, I guess it's been a month now, they had, and of course they were dealing with a new train, and it's obviously a little wider than probably a light rail car. But they had redesigned the seats such that there was no barrier to sort of sweeping out or cleaning underneath them in the legs. And I realize you're probably in many ways stuck with whatever the configuration was of the seats. I just didn't know if, as you're going through these overhauls, are you able to improve anything from a maintenance standpoint of, ease of maintenance? Or do you just pretty much have to go back to the original configuration?
So we have discussed internally changing the configuration of the seats, whether we move from padded seats to hard plastic seats. I know we've run through some different scenarios, but we haven't made a decision at this point.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, do you have any sense of, obviously, the agency, and I think rightfully so, pursued this course of, do you have any sense of how much money you're saving in the long run? And I love the incremental overhaul thing because, you probably learned some stuff in the process that you can save yourself the pain on in future steps. And so to be able to pull it out of service temporarily and then put it back in and go to the next phase. I love that concept, but do you have any sense of how much you're saving?
I think that's one of the major advantages you just pointed out, is being able to keep the fleet in service. If this was fully contracted out, you'd have to pull a car out of service, send it off to a contractor, and by doing it, on a component based, I guess you would say, really keeps those vehicles in service. But we do have a couple of stories about things that we've done that we did consider contracting out, and found out that we could do it much cheaper. You want to tell the story about the cameras?
Sure. So part of the safety and security, we wanted to install cameras on the vehicles. So the newer S70s came with cameras installed, but the older ones didn't. And so we put a procurement together. Our supply chain group did a really good job, and we got a contract in place, negotiated. And when the first number came back, I actually asked the contractor if they fat fingered the number in there. So we brought them on site. We negotiated, and we worked with our internal communications group, our Jeff and his team, and we installed it ourselves. So between adding a whole separate camera system to the older 40 cars and upgrading the cameras on the S70s, we saved about $3.5 million real dollars.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
And Jeff, I think you have an example as well.
Yeah, we have another example of our ADA ramps. The manufacturer recommended certain components to be replaced as part of the quarter life overhaul for ADA ramps, and it came out to about $13,000 per ramp just in components to be replaced, and we have 4 ramps per S70 per car. So if you do the math, it comes out to quite a few ramps. When we got in there, took the ramps apart, found out what parts actually needed to be replaced. We cut that down to about somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000 per ramp. So we're saving about $5,000 just per ramp, just on those components.
Does that factor in as well your cost of labor? I'm assuming it does. But.
Yes, yeah, that includes that includes the cost of labor, and we're doing that all in house. And like Eddie said, we're able to just take a ramp off of a vehicle, keep that vehicle into service for that day, overhaul the ramp, put that ramp on another vehicle, and so there's a lot of advantage of that in addition to cost savings.
Yeah. Beth, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had a question about the older vehicles where they have like 1.2 million miles, I think is what you said, and that they're incorporated within this overhaul model. Do you ever look at the overall like structure of the vehicle and say, is this becoming obsolete? And then do you, like the design discussion about the seats that don't have any legs so you can sweep out underneath, how does that factor into your decision to just overhaul versus to look at the purchase of a new vehicle overall?
So I wish we'd have put some pictures in when we had stripped a vehicle down to a skeleton. I think when we did a tour of the light rail facility, I think you had an opportunity to see a vehicle that had, the skin completely ripped up. You want to talk about the structural integrity?
Sure. So we do a condition assessment on the vehicles. And so working with Jeff and his team, and that's one of the advantages is we have the people who are touching the cars every single day. And so we did an assessment and deemed it was safe. We worked with our technical services team there, that engineering group, and they were safe to operate. And they didn't need any additional overhaul activity other than what we're doing right now.
Much of the challenge is not necessarily in the structural integrity of the vehicle. The vehicles are well built and still in great structural shape. Much of the challenge is with technology. Technology's changed quite a lot since 1999, and so we have to go in and upgrade and update those components, specific components, to update the technology and get those back into the fleet. And so things like our communication system on our SD fleet, that's old technology from 1999. It still uses DOS technology.
Wow.
And so we would really like to update that to match what we have on the S70s to give us a lot more flexibility and better communication, passenger information. So those types of things are the things that we're looking at updating largely.
I was just going to say, there's a lot to be said for being limited to 8 characters for a file name.
That's not being
There
one
are
of them.
some of us in our 70s that still work pretty well on DOS. I do have a question. I think your last slide showed your 5-year projection, about $12.5 to $13 million a year. But you were also talking about accelerating the refurb if you had additional funds. How much additional funds would you need in order to accelerate the refurbing of all of the vehicles?
Well, I don't know that we've
So-
done have you done those calculations?
So really at this point, it comes down to staffing, because right now, the body work,
Staffing costs money.
staffing costs money.
And so my question is, how much money would you need? Have you really looked at that?
We would have to dig into that to give you a solid
Okay.
number. Like I said, those calculations or those numbers we provided are based on what we have today and what we believe our capabilities are.
Right.
So we would have to do that work and get back to you.
Do we have a problem in refurbishing over 10 years versus 5 years in the life of the equipment? That is, what I'm getting at is if we have to accelerate the work in order to extend the life and maintain the life and usability of the equipment, do we need to do that and figure out a way to find the people and the extra money in order to preserve the life of our equipment?
So if, where we're talking 10 years, the 1999 vehicles, 10 years from now, the condition is definitely going to deteriorate. It would be advantageous for us to accelerate that. So we had those done, and they wouldn't deteriorate to a point that they were worse off than the vehicles we're doing right now.
And then it would be very difficult to get them to operate effectively. If they deteriorate to the point where they're no longer really ushave
And it would actually cost more money at that point, because we'd have to rehab up to current standard, and then all of a sudden have to
I would
overhaul
be
at that
interested
point.
to know what your assessment would be as to the additional funds that would be required to accelerate this process in order to preserve the usability of the equipment. And not have them deteriorate over the longer period of time before they get get worked on?
We can definitely get those numbers for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I did have a brief, just a follow-up question. When you extend the life on the older vehicles, what type of life extension are you looking at that would be cost justified in terms of that? For the 44-ish vehicles or the older ones?
So what we're trying to do is reach that 30-year benchmark. And so we're trying to make it to the end of that 30-year useful life. And so the overhaul enables us to do that.
Okay, so it gets to 30 years.
Right. And then at that
Okay.
point, a decision would be made.
As to whether to look for purchasing new vehicles at some point. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Correct.
What experience have our partners had that you're working with in this consortium you mentioned? Will working on them, say the half-life and 3/4, can they get 35, maybe 40 years out of their rolling stock?
Some agencies are actually looking at an end-of-life overhaul. And so Denver and TriMet are actually ahead of us. They've purchased the vehicles before us, and I know they're actually scoping out what that would actually look like.
But nobody's quite to the point where they've done it and it either worked or didn't work in extending the life significantly, as Beth was mentioning.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of agencies that are in the same time frame as us. You know, San Diego, Denver, Portland, they were a little ahead of us. I think San Diego, we did some of our purchases with them.
Correct.
So, but we are an active users group and meet regularly and talk about these issues. I participated in a study group that focused on state of good repair, and we met with some folks from Berlin, Germany. They were using 1960 S-Bahn vehicles, and they were in the process of their last major overhaul. And that thing came off the line and looked like a brand new 1960 model car with the latest technology, like Jeff mentioned, upgraded inside of it. But the car itself just looked amazing. They said, we're at the point where it's the last overhaul. Kyle's was mentioning a structural evaluation. That was an aluminum frame, and it was deteriorating at the molecular level. They weren't going to have a frame to overhaul at the next period. So they had researched that end-of-life overhaul sometime in the past, well back, and they had extended that on. So it's a very thoughtful evaluation of what those costs are, how much time you're going to get out of it versus how much life you'll get out of it. The other challenge is, the challenge is when we do these projects, we're bringing a large number of vehicles on at one time. Contrast that with our bus fleet where we're rotating, we're planning on a 13, 14-year life now. We hope that gets longer as time goes on, but you're continually moving vehicles in and out of the fleet. You don't really have that flexibility here. I think as time goes on, as we look at other extensions and that, we bring on potentially, or ridership increases where we need to bring on a few additional vehicles. We'll start sprinkling that with different aged vehicles, and that certainly helps us. And we should probably look at that those opportunities in the future to incrementally bring some cars on. The challenge again with that though is now you've got a technology at a time and materials at a time. You probably, maybe your air conditioning units, the ones that were originally built, don't even exist anymore. And you're talking about parts inventory and sizes to try to fit and configure. So a lot of challenges within this group, and we take great pride in the work that they do because they are attacking a very challenging problem and figuring out innovative solutions to those problems.
Steve,
Thanks.
one question I have. So we obviously have partner agencies that we're working with. How many of them are doing similar kinds of overhauls themselves?
I know there's at least 3 or 4 that's doing that's doing the same thing we are.
Okay.
And that's what's really advantageous. San Diego, Denver, we work really close with, and what's really nice is they're ahead of us. And so we can learn a lot from what they've actually put together and then work with Jeff and his team to modify it to our actual need.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for that
Thank you.
presentation and for your work on it. Steve, do you have probably some other items? Okay.
Going long today. So next, last week I promised you an update on the UVX budget and right-of-way update. I've handed you a sheet because it's kind of a small spreadsheet. So as we track this, we use the federal accounting system, what they call standard cost categories. So SCC codes, for example, SCC 10 is the guideway, the bus lanes. So you can see the budget and expended to date. As you would imagine, that one's 100% complete and a little money left over. As we build those budgets, we do two things to look at unexpected occurrences. We have allocated contingencies that we build into those budget line items, and then we have an unallocated contingency that we carry at the end. So we kind of do the Rumsfeldian type approach. The known unknowns we put in the allocated contingency, and the unknown unknowns we put in the unallocated contingency. So you can see a project total of about $160.2 million, expended to date about $149.6 million. Remaining obligations, that's money that we know we're going to spend, that's been allocated to work that's going to be done but hasn't been billed yet, about another 9.3, so remaining about 1.2 million. So still drilling into the right-of-way. Sorry, got ahead of myself. If we drill into the right-of-way budget, we've got remaining obligations about 1.45. Now, those are the properties that you'll continue to see come forward, and there's allocated contingency built into those, right? So as you saw last time, we had a final cost that was higher than the appraised value. We've taken those into account. We understand where the property owner thinks they need to be and where we think we've been, and we've made an estimation of and given ourselves some cushion in there. So as you see this, you see unallocated contingency assigned to right-of-way of $661,000, within that 1.4 million. So I feel like the team's done a really good job of continuing to protect the agency to make sure that we align in budget at the end of the day.
At what point does the contractor sort of, the retention get settled? And I mean, is that 2 years after, a year after?
Yeah, it takes a while depending on some of the warranty items and just punch list. You know, you've got to go through, for example, landscaping that has to survive through the summer, and they have a responsibility to replace and do that. So you do have it's a fairly lengthy closeout process for that.
Steve, I had a question
Yeah.
about the right of ways and everything else. How long does that is that typically a couple years as well? And do you find any cost spikes in that as a result of that delay?
No,
Or is it pretty standard?
You're taking it at a point in time of the occurrence of the acquisition. So you've set that point back in time. You've done your appraisals, the property owner's done their appraisals. So you're looking at that, but it does take time. If there's a disagreement, you know, we have a process to go through the state ombudsman and both parties, we try to work that out. If we can't reach agreement, then it's the condemnation process. There's actual formal hearings and things to go through. That happens very rarely. We're usually able, and you'll see most of these we will settle on an amount and to the benefit of both parties. And so it does take time. I think on the 2015 program, we may actually still have a property or two hanging out there. Airport line, the project manager was good. Matt was good. Good job. But, you know, there was disagreement, and there's, you know, especially in these large areas with high commercial development, a lot of issues there. And you saw that last time, the impact of the construction easement, the property owner was in the process of doing some remodel, and the changes to the lighting, changes to the design of the parking lot. those take time for them to work out what they anticipate the costs are, and then for us to review and acknowledge those. So that was an update on that. Any other questions on that?
No, but that was very helpful. Thank you.
One more item.
Please.
Great work for our IT department. We've talked previously about our electronic fare collection, our new program that we put in place that saving us about $800,000 a year. Jerry Van Wee led a team of programmers and software designers under Dan Harmuth, our director of IT, and turned that around. They were just recently recognized by the Utah chapter of the Project Management Institute as the Project of the Year for their project management approach to attacking that project. And they did a great job of hitting the budget and the schedule and really delivering a high-quality project for UTA and our riders.
Very nice.
That concludes my report. Oh, wait, I do have one more. Wait, Point of the Mountain.
Okay.
Can't,
I was going to say, it's not somebody's birthday, is it?
No.
Okay.
No, past that. We had some discussion a week ago about Point of the Mountain and the alternatives analysis. And I think we may not have been as clear as we could have been on that. So let me rehash some of the key points there. Salt Lake County awarded $400,000 from the county's portion of the fourth quarter to Draper City to perform an alternative analysis for the Point of the Mountain area. Now, Draper submitted, there was a request for projects to the county. The county evaluated those. The county has talked to us that they want to advance capital projects and planning stuff out of some of their portion of their fourth quarter funds. So that's not UTA dollars, that's Draper, that's Salt Lake County dollars. Draper, in turn, has asked UTA to manage that study. So we are going to take responsibility for working on that alternative analysis. We are contributing to that. We are contributing $50,000, as you saw last week. UDOT's in for $50,000. Wasatch Front and MAG are each in for $25,000. And we're still looking for funding sources. All the partners are looking for another estimated $250,000 from other sources to achieve what we think is the full scope of that project. We're going to evaluate options to serve that Point of the Mountain area with transit. Now, we've said light rail, but all modes get considered in an alternative analysis. What's the best mode and what's the best alignment to serve that? A planning study infers no commitment by UTA. We're not obligated to anything beyond completing the study. But if we plan, or if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. We've got to participate as an agency, as a part of the transportation community in how we're going to meet the transportation needs of this rapidly growing area. This is just one example of what we're facing within our region. We need to actively participate in what the plans are. We're going to see significant growth. You've heard from Wasatch Front and MAG about the type of growth they're projecting to see, and transit, public transportation needs to be a big part of that. We've recommended to the board, and I think you've concurred, that our focus needs to be on service with this fourth quarter funds, but that does not preclude us and should not preclude us from looking at planning opportunities. The legislature this past year gave us the first opportunity for state funding for capital projects. Now that TTIF is dedicated to capital projects for transit agencies in the state, and we will aggressively compete as we see fit. There are projects identified in the long-range plans for Wasatch Front Regional Council and Mountain Land Association of Governments that say, UTA, we've looked at your finances, and with these additional funding sources projected in their financial assumptions, you should have the headroom to do projects like that. Agencies throughout the country have this challenge of how to provide those levels of service, and that's our service choices study that's ongoing now to really talk to our communities in our service area about what is that? Is that high frequency and a ridership focus or a coverage focus? And then competing with the needs for capital expansion. And so we as staff want to come to you with thoughtful consideration of that. We're not at that point with Point of the Mountain. Right now, we're in a study phase, a small investment from UTA to study a critical area that we anticipate seeing rapid growth right now. So I just wanted to clarify that from last week.
I would concur, Steve. These things take years. I always, as a former elected official, I always thought they took too long and couldn't figure out why they couldn't be done, before the next election. But I mean, realistically, you do an alternatives analysis and try to determine the right mode and best alignment. And then you would, if you could come up with the funding, you'd have to do some kind of an EIS or, to meet some kind of NEPA requirements. I mean, realistically, what is the time frame of that kind of a study process just to even get to a point where you start to even begin to develop a capital project?
Yeah. We'll use Frontrunner as an example. Frontrunner North, the alternative analysis was complete in 1995. The project opened in 2008. So now, if there's political will and funding sources available, you can certainly advance that. I think we proved that on, the S line. The resources and the will from the communities was there, and we were able to develop that project fairly quickly. If the alignment's used in the corridor and there isn't a lot of property acquisition, they can go a lot quicker. So there's a lot of factors that depend on that, but you're right. And especially if we look for federal funding sources, then you get into, you're competing nationally for projects. So, as we're moving through with the Ogden BRT, that project has taken over 10 years. I think UVX was around 14.
Can I quickly add to that? So,
Sure, please.
the alternatives analysis doesn't actually look at specifically coming up with funding. There's a parallel process, which is a really positive thing, that's still part of the original Envision Utah work for Point of the Mountain. And so in this case, Zion's Bank has been contracted as a part of that process to look at, how do you develop the local and potentially state or regional sources to fund a project like that? And then, like Steve said, our technical analysis focuses more on the alignment, the ridership, cost effectiveness, and then we reach a hold point looking at, after that's done, to see if it would meet federal thresholds. Where would we be a year from now relative to how much of the local dollars can be looked at through this other parallel process? So there's really some neat things happening at the same time.
Seems to me, though, on this Point of the Mountain, we've got a complicating factor. Even the 13 years for Frontrunner, you didn't have somebody that was already there that had to move out and clear the area for the new development to move in. At the Point of the Mountain, we've got a prison that has to move from where it's at to out near the airport, and who knows how long that's going to take and what delays may come from there before you can even then begin to seriously plan for the projects that would come along to put transit into that area.
Yeah, but
So-
it's not too soon to plan for
It's not
those
too soon to
alignments.
plan, certainly, but you've got all these other complicating factors that would stand in the way of the completion of a project, because so many other things have to be done first.
That's correct. But I believe, studies are ongoing about the potential land uses, and transportation plays a key
Right,
role.
right.
High capacity, frequent transit service there could make a huge change in the parking demands,
plans,
the
sure.
street capacity that needs to be built. And those considerations need to go hand in hand. They need to happen concurrently. We need to know the feasibility of these alignments so that people can move forward. When the state gets ready to bring developers on board, we've got a basis of information that we can provide to them that can,
For their planning.
for their planning, exactly. Thank you.
I would also argue, I agree. I think that when we are looking at long-term options and to maximize the minimal amounts of geographical land that we still have to develop, I think that transit is a key component to that. And I know that Carlos often acknowledges that very fact. And when you are looking at how do I manage this finite amount of land to maximize it, to also create jobs long-term, to create housing long-term, those things really have a lot of value when you're looking at a transit option as well as streets. We look at the, hugely fast growth in the southwest portion of Salt Lake County. And one of the things that has been a constant challenge is we don't have enough transit options. We don't have other options. The growth kind of took over a little bit. And these are things that I think what we can do moving forward is to make sure that transit is part of that discussion and that dialogue in all of these facets moving forward. So I appreciate the continued dialogue on this. I think it's really valuable.
Thank you. That's my report.
Okay. One thing maybe we consider for a future meeting, I was just thinking about it, and I have a cow in West Weber County, and occasionally I go up to visit it. Fortunately, my brother-in-law is raising it, but I watch the growth that's happening out in that area, and over the last 10 years, and watching really the orchards of Santa Quinn disappear at a fairly brisk pace. Is how much of the planning have we done for some of those areas? And I realize they're on the regional transportation plan, but they're pretty general lines, and I don't, and I know we're working on corridor to Box Elder County, but I'm just thinking to come back after the fact. I mean, really, in some ways, although we do have an alignment potentially already to Utah County, ideally you'd have the corridor preserved 15 years ago, and then you'd consider whether or not to implement. But it would be helpful to understand sort of what those long-term things are and what impediments are quickly coming into play. And
Okay.
I just think that would be helpful sometime when we're ready.
Okay. We can do some updates on both ends of the corridor,
Yeah,
the service area.
that'd be great. Thank you. We'll next have an update regarding our quarterly investment report. And Troy Bingham is here, and this is an information-only item, but an important one for us.
Good morning, board. Oh, do I need it?
2-0, nice work.
All right,
Clearly, we have a competitive softball team.
ready. All right, good morning, Board of Trustees, members of the community. This is the quarterly investment report per our policy. I am here as an alternate to Bob Biles, who actually manages the investments, but I'm presenting to you what we have currently invested. You'll see is in the top in our federally secured securities that we have invested in, and then we're invested in Zions Capital Advisors. It manages $28 million of our portfolio. Zions Bank that we have in our actual checking account is about $16.3 million that is daily, goes into a repo account and does get invested at 2.38%. And then we have the Public Treasury Investment Fund that has $164 million. A lot of that is in our bond reserve funds, and those are also invested at a rate higher than the current benchmark. This report is to report to you that our 3-month T-bill rates have been exceeded with all the investments, short of the daily repo is a little bit less than the quarterly investment at only 2.38%. And the most important thing is we made no transactions in the last quarter. We have not sold anything, and we've not bought anything. So that is the quarterly investment report. I'll stand for any questions.
How liquid is the Public Treasures Investment Fund, and obviously that between that and Capital Advisors is pretty similar. Why do you choose one over the other, and has one outperformed the other at times? And
So Zions Capital Advisor currently manages our 1 to 3 year portfolio. We manage the 3 to 5. That's why we purchased those long-term securities. You'll see our 5 years. the Public Trust Investment Fund, I can get funds out within 24 hours, up to $10 million, and then a certain period longer, I think I can get more funds, all of our funds out within a week if we wanted. So they're that liquid.
Okay. So it's a pretty good alternative for us.
Yeah, so it does well for the state, and most of the localities do and use the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund as a basis for most of their investments.
I was just going to comment that that's a good rate considering the high liquidity of that fund. So I now I can understand how that's kind of all looked at a little bit better. So thank you.
What's the maturities of your Public Treasurer's Investment Fund? Those bonds, what maturities are they?
So their maturities, they have maturities, I think they range within the 1 year. So they typically invest in money markets and short-term securities, 3-month treasury bills and things like that, so the fund is liquid.
So you don't have any 10-year or 20-year bonds in those?
No, you wouldn't see that in the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund.
Okay. All right, thank you. So that there's no risk, no extraordinary risk of interest rate changes that would then impact the value of the bond themselves. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for that update.
Thank you.
Well, tell Bob you're a very valid replacement for him. So, okay, great. Thank you. Next up is our under contracts, disbursements, and change orders and pre-procurement. We have Todd Mills talking to us about the joint vendor managed inventory. Todd?
Morning, Mr. Chair, trustees. I'm very excited to be here. This is something that 5.5 years ago when I started seemed like a bit of a pipe dream to have a contract of this type. So it's exciting to finally be bringing this for approval. This was a proposal to enter in a contract for vendor managed inventory services of bus parts, specifically with New Flyer, which is also called the Aftermarket Parts Company. Essentially what that means is the vendor will purchase and hold stock of inventory items on contract and will ship to UTA within 24 hours of notification. So as soon as we have demand, we kick out an order to them, they'll ship it to us within 24 hours. Obviously, this will help us to increase our parts availability to our maintenance group, as well as decrease our lead times to get parts, reduce our inventory, and then a side benefit to this contract is being able to reverse engineer and resource hard to source or difficult parts, or just looking for better pricing in general. Give you a little bit of background and history on this. I mentioned 5.5 years ago, this was a pipe dream. 4 years ago, we kind of started looking into it seriously. And then about 3 years ago, UTA led a joint meeting with 8 other agencies here in Salt Lake to have discussions about the possibility of doing something like this. And at the time, it was focused solely on light rail. As Kyle mentioned earlier, with the overhaul program, a lot of our parts on light rail can be 365-day lead time. So we were, as multiple agencies, looking at what are our alternatives to overcome that hurdle. And vendor managed inventory was one of those things that we were looking into. At the time, other agencies were kind of like, yeah, you go check it out and see and let us know how it goes. They weren't quite willing to take that step. But finally, with the consortium that we're a member of, the Light Rail Users Group, we were able to find Portland and San Diego that were also at a point that they were ready to take a leap of faith, so to speak, and start looking at something. And we expanded that from light rail to include all of bus and commuter rail as well. This particular contract is just specific to bus. However, we're working on negotiations right now. We're in the process of that with a light rail contract as well. And I expect to be bringing that to the board probably within the next 6 months time frame. We went out for RFP in this past summer, and this was a best value RFP, did the analysis, and have selected, like I said, New Flyer. This really is groundbreaking in the industry. The first time an RFP of this type has been done with joint agencies, and where we've gotten together, leveraged our buying power together between the three of us, and combining our resources. Between the three of us, we now become as big as Chicago. And so now we have much more leverage with the suppliers. We've got a bigger voice. We represent a much bigger customer to them, obviously, which gives us the opportunity to push some things. And one of the things we pushed on this RFP was to meet or beat our current pricing. So realistically, this does not cost UTA any additional money than we would have already been paying for these parts, because the requirement was they had to meet or beat the current pricing on this. This current contract is 1.25 million. It's only based on the first 100 parts, which is kind of a pilot program. We expect to be ramping that up very quickly as this proves to be successful. As we do that, we'll go out for competitive bids on additional parts. And if New Flyer is the lowest bid on those, we'll add those to the contract. And so I see this ramping from 100 parts to well over 1,000, probably within a year or two. The initial term of this contract is 3 years, but it also has 2 options that we can renew on. As I mentioned earlier, there's some opportunity for reverse engineering, and New Flyer does have lots of engineering resources to help us do that. I'll talk about a little bit more with the light rail side, but we really see that as a big opportunity for us on the light rail side when that contract comes to fruition. An example of something that we've done within the last, it was about a year ago, I think, where we had an S-cam, little S latch, basically, that the bid from the current supplier was about $1,100. And we looked at that and said, well, wait a minute, this is something that's extremely expensive. What are our options here? We started looking locally and working with our engineering group, and we were able to find it and source it for $18. And so that's just an example of something that we can significantly reduce some of these extremely expensive, parts that are coming from overseas. Mentioned that some of the benefits there also reducing inventory, so we do expect to be able to reduce our lead time, which obviously means I can hold less inventory here. The supplier is now holding that inventory. I can get it within however many days of shipping, basically. So 3 to 5 days, typically, from California is where some of these will be coming from. So we're asking the board to approve this contract for VMI services with New Flyer.
I just had one question. Thank you so much for bringing this and for all the work that I know went into this in the last couple of years. I just had one question, though, in terms of it's a 100 parts was the principal component of this. And does it matter the size of those parts, or is there any other things that would impact that number, or is that just whatever that part is, the first 100 are incorporated in this? Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. The contract seems to be for $250,000 a year for the 5 years, 3 years of the contract and 2 years renewal for the $1,250,000. Is that our portion of this agreement with San Diego and TriMet, or is this total for all 3 partners in this? How is that working? Are we committing to the $1,200,000 over 5 years?
So there is no full commitment. So we're not guaranteed to spend 1.25.
Right.
It's based on demand. But the 1.25 is UTA's 100 parts. San Diego and Portland are also going to their board basically as we speak for approval for their contracts. The way the contract works is we have the RFP, which is the base contract, but then each agency did individual contracts with specific items related to their agencies.
And the company was willing to look at it as in total for pricing, but individually for actually filling the contract provisions.
Correct. That was part of the requirements of the RFP.
Okay, thank you.
A couple other questions I had for you. As you go to this, will you be drawing down sort of existing inventory stock and shifting to this if it's successful, or is this stock really that you don't keep in inventory and that you're just at the mercy of the supplier currently?
So we do have current inventory of all of these parts, and we will be bleeding down that inventory as we transition over. So once we implement this, we'll reset our lead times to recalculate our reorder points.
Okay.
And then basically the inventory will just dwindle down till it hits that new reorder point.
Okay. And then the second question, this is just more out of curiosity, but I mean, do they ever look at, or will the vendor ever look at things like 3D printing? And, you know, you look at some of these specialty parts and you're like, there's got to be an easier way to come up with these. And I just wonder whether that ever gets explored, or especially when there's huge lead times and they're overpriced for, you know, a piece of plastic, basically.
So I know it's something that New Flyer has briefly talked about a little bit of that they're exploring as well, but currently there's no one
Not quite
really,
ready.
yeah, exactly operating with that.
Well, congratulations on having enough courage to sort of lead out in this. And, you know, I mean, even if it doesn't work, I'd rather have tried than not, but I guess I'm optimistic that it will be a great trendsetter and probably a great way to manage part inventory. So,
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve this contract.
I'll second.
have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Our discussion items and before us, and we amending our board policy 4.1.3, process for establishing board policies. A policy to establish policies. So
We like to call it the policy on policies.
Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. As you mentioned, I'm here to get some direction on the proposed policy for adopting board and UTA policies. And I believe you should have it. Can you bring that up, Kathy? I can walk through it while she's working on it. It has a fundamental characteristic of all good policies in that it's very brief. So,
A reminder to those who are writing policies at the current time.
That's right. So the process for adopting a board policy starts at the board's request, with a request to the executive director to put a proposed policy together. Somewhat is what we've done here today. And the executive director or designee presents that policy to the board for direction, and then presents it to the local advisory council for consultation purposes. And then it comes back to this board for final adoption and approval. So that's the very brief process for approving a board policy. For UTA policies, the executive director brings it to the board, who reviews it, and then it's placed in your consent agenda if you choose to approve it, and if not, it goes back to the executive director for further revision. And I think we've got that now.
It is. I am looking at it on our packet. But,
Yes, I read through that.
how's that different? Obviously, the advisory council is new to us. How's that sort of different from maybe the way it has previously been done?
So previously, it would have gone to a board committee and then to the whole board for approval. And we don't have committees at this point.
Yeah.
So, and then the new governance structure accommodates the local advisory council. So that's the addition.
Okay. Any questions for Lisa? Or?
No, just that I think this should be the model for all policies in the future.
I knew you would appreciate it.
Yes.
Is that page length or?
Page length and description
Length of discussion.
and length of discussion.
I'll pass that on to Bob. I think his financial policy is about 7 pages at this point.
So, do you have any concerns, either of you?
No, I think this is a great way to proceed.
All right.
Thank you.
So
All
I think we're game to go with this policy. So
Thank you.
let's see. Next, thanks, Lisa. I don't show any other sort of public discussion, and note that our next meeting will be on April 24th at 9 a.m. I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session for the discussion of, I guess, labor or collective bargaining.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we go into closed session.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to go into closed session, which will be in the Spring Canyon conference room. Just as a note, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes, and so we'll excuse ourselves and go into closed session, and then return later for adjournment.
Yes.
All right.
Ready?
We've returned from our closed session, and I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We stand adjourned.